All right. Welcome, SciCommers. Today for this mentor chat, we are joined by Dennis Meredith. And Dennis is a veteran science communicator and author of science thrillers. His recent book, The Climate Pandemic, explores the science, technology, politics, economics, and psychology of climate disruption and the implications of those human-driven climate disruptions on the longevity of humans. And for this mentor chat, Dennis will be talking about his most recent book, and then also more broadly, whether writing a book may be the right choice for you in your science communication. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Well, I was going to say, I've had two recent books explaining research. The second edition was published in 2021 by Oxford University Press. And then the latest book is The Climate Pandemic, and that was published this year, and we published that on our own imprint. And so I'm going to share my screen now and talk about some of the issues that I think are important in terms of writing books. Now, can everybody see my screen? No, wait, I have to hit the share button. There we go. Now can everybody see my screen? You good? Okay. I call writing a book a blessed curse. It's blessed because you're so enamored of a topic, you're willing to spend like years researching it and writing it and sitting in a small room and working on it. And it's a curse because you're so enamored of a topic that you're willing to spend years researching and writing and sitting in a small room writing about it. So there's two sides of the same coin. And I'm going to start by talking about the cons because they are significant and they are something you need to understand before you even try to think about writing a book. So it's a blessed curse. First of all, it doesn't pay. You're going to get a small advance, and you may not even make back that advance. Now, I should emphasize it doesn't pay directly. It may pay indirectly, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It stresses your relationships. I've known authors who have gotten divorces because the author spent so much time working on the book they neglected their spouse or their significant other. So you have to have a spouse like mine who's perfectly happy to see me go away and leave her alone and sit in a small room and write. You have to do it-yourself editing and marketing. Publishers do not do conceptual editing on your book. They won't market your book beyond just sending it out to the usual suspects. So you're going to have to do all that yourself. It's a massive time commitment. It'll take a year, 2 years to write and research the book, another year or so looking for an agent or a publisher, another year or two for the agent or publisher to get going on publishing the book. So there's a long, frustrating search for an agent or publisher. I know authors who've gone through a dozen pitches to agents before they found one, maybe even more, and you're going to get a lot of rejections from publishers. So, but there are pros. There are pros. It makes you an expert in a field. And so when you go to pitch a freelance article, you have written a book on that topic. And so you have credibility. It also makes you a generic expert in the sense that people see, well, he or she has written a book. So they know how to write a lot of stuff. So maybe I'll give them, if they've written about topic A, maybe I'll give them an assignment to write about topic B. It builds your writing muscles. I found after I wrote a few books that writing a 6,000, 8,000 word article was just nothing. I felt like, well, I've done 100,000 words at a shot over a year or two. I can easily write an article. It also builds marketing skills. In marketing your own book, you'll learn about social media. You'll learn about email marketing. You'll learn how to connect with your audiences much more effectively. It's an entree to other writing assignments. I mentioned that earlier. Not only will editors trust you to write about the topic that your book is on, they'll be interested in hearing what you have to say about related topics, even different topics. It gives you a visceral satisfaction to hold your book, a physical book in your hand after you've written worked so many years on it, is just very satisfying. And it impresses your family and frenemies. The guy who didn't think you were going to amount to anything all of a sudden gets very impressed when you can wave a book in front of him. So there are pros, but you only write a book if you have something to say. That is, if you feel something that you have something inside you that needs to get out, that it is unique. If you're going to write the 15th book on a given topic, then it's not necessarily true that you should write a book. Is it worth a full book? There are topics that are just absolutely fascinating, but they're not that broad. They're not broad enough. So if you have a topic you're interested in, make sure that you can expand it to book size. You're willing to devote years to a topic. I've devoted up to 6 or 7 years on a given topic. You can jumpstart it with an article or a proposal. A lot of times what authors will do is they'll start by pitching an article on the topic to a magazine. It's published, it impresses an editor, it impresses an agent, and so you can get a contract. A proposal is the same way. If you write a really compelling proposal with a lot of background, a lot of sell points about a book, you can get a contract, and it has to generate interest. They have to. Your editor or publisher has to say, "Oh, this is really cool. I want to do this." So this is one of my favorite quotes from Gloria Steinem. Writing is the only thing I do that I don't feel I should be doing something else. Only write a book if you have to write. If it's so ingrained in your psyche that you feel guilty if you're not writing, and that's the way I feel. So I really resonate with Gloria Steinem's content quote. Now I'll also let you read this from Winston Churchill, who really knew what it was to write a book.
That's awesome.
And you're going to get, there's a period where you get into your book, you're interested in the topic, you think it'll be a good idea to write it, you get engaged in it, you're frightened that you're never going to finish the book, and then you're frightened that you're going to finish the book and not be able to write about it anymore. You're going to get addicted to it. I mean, there's almost a physical addiction. I loved sitting and writing about the topics that I've written about, because I'm so engaged in it. So it's part of that blessed curse I talked about. Now, seeking an agent, it's relatively easy to seek an agent. There's a site called Query Tracker, and almost all agents use it because it's so convenient to them. And that lets you pay $25 a year. And it lets you go in and find only those agents that are interested in your particular type of book. And it provides a structure that you can pitch them. So when you're looking for an agent, Query Tracker is the way to go. Now, with academic publishers, they welcome direct submissions from authors, and you can do that very easily. I did it with Oxford. The other academic publishers are the same. Commercial publishers, almost all of them require an agent. So you have to go through that gauntlet before you can even try to get to a commercial publisher. Now, I also advocate, if you're going to write a book, learn about writing fiction. You don't necessarily have to write a whole bunch of books, novels like I did, but I found that when I started learning to write fiction, my nonfiction got more compelling. And remember, with a book, you have to pull people, readers through your book with all the techniques you can possibly employ, and fiction has some good ones. For example, tell stories. This is a fascinating piece of research that was done a while back, where scientists put people in these MRI machines, and they had them read passages of text. And they found that when people were reading about a visual scene, the visual cortex lit up back here. When they read about a smell, the olfactory cortex lit up. When they read about a sound, the auditory cortex lit up. And what that told them, and what it tells you as an author, is when you tell a story, then you engage your audience, your readers, in much more than a cerebral way. They build a model, a sensory model in their brains. So when you're researching your topic for a book, think about telling stories. Think about portraying the senses. There's a rule in writing novels that you try to evoke at least 3 of the 5 senses in any given scene. So you talk about what something looked like, sounded like, smelled like, tasted like, and felt like. So portray the senses. That's another key, a key element of writing good fiction. You also describe emotions. It's a problem when you're interviewing scientists, is they don't like to talk about their emotions, but emotions really engage readers. And that's what novelists know. They talk about the emotions of their characters. Similarly, portray conflict. There is conflict in science, but scientists tend to want to downplay it. But make sure that you understand that they're conflicts and you can portray them. Now, don't do it the way these guys did, where you're swapping equations. It has to be a conflict that your reader can understand. Show, don't tell. I'll let you read this yourself. Now, this is one of the primary rules of writing fiction. You don't say she was surprised. You show her being surprised. Her eyes widened and she gasped. So think when you're writing your book, show, don't tell. Describe characters. I'll let you read this yourself. There's a rule among novelists that if you don't describe your character, your reader's going to describe it, going to have an image in their brain that's not what you believe, what you want to convey. So you describe your character. So scientists, people who are writing science books tend not to describe the characters in human terms, but it engages your audience. Use dynamic quotes. I'll let you read this yourself. When you interview somebody, they're going to give you a quote. Don't necessarily use the entire quote. Think about what the purpose of your quote is, what you want to convey. Tighten it down. Don't misquote, but tighten it down so that it does what you want it to do. Describe action. Her eye. This is from the earlier slide. Scientists like to talk about what they found in terms of concepts, but you want to ask them what they did. What physically did they do to make their discovery or to do their research? And describing action enlivens your book, your nonfiction book. Use suspense, and this is, of course, the famous house from Psycho. You can structure the chapters in your book so that you pull people through it by using suspense. And here's what I mean. You add suspense by starting a story at the beginning of your chapter and not giving the payoff until the end. Asking a question at the beginning and not answering it until the end. A discovery timeline. The person was looking for X. Well, they found A, B, C, D, and E. It pulls your reader through the chapter. Start out with a need and end up with a solution. Destroy a thesis. So people like to see stuff destroyed. So in a chapter, you say, "Oh, this is the thesis, and this is why it's dumb." For controversy, give the pros and cons. So use that technique of fiction to add suspense to your story. Now, I'll let you read this yourself. Another thing you want to do when you're writing a book is think about analogies. Always think about analogies. And I'll let you read these. So anytime you're trying to do a concept, trying to develop a concept for your book, think about the analogies you can use. Like the Oreo cookie is a great one. I like that one especially because everybody likes Oreos and knows what they're like. You also want to create metaphors and similes. So when you're writing your book, think about metaphors that will work. For example, here's one. This is a cool one. There's a fungus that affects cicadas, and it makes the fungus infects them and makes them want to mate, but it also releases spores. So the guy called them sex-crazed salt shakers of death. Here's another one. This was otherwise a pretty arcane piece of research where he was studying a protein that was not taken care of by the cell, not regulated by the cell. And so he called it a lone wolf protein. And boy, it pulled the reader in. Here's another one. I was doing an article on the beta adrenergic receptor, and that's a very arcane sounding name, as is 7-transmembrane spanning receptor. That's not very interesting. So I said, well, it's like an anaconda. It's got this long molecule. So it goes in and out of the cell 7 times. So it's an anaconda receptor. Here's the one. This is a key element of the immune system. This is called a dendritic cell. And it has these long tendrils that it reaches out and grabs antigens and pulls them into the bloodstream to present them to the immune system. So I said it's like a jellyfish. It's floating around the bloodstream. So think metaphors and similes. Also, when you're when you're editing your book, there are 3 levels of editing. There's conceptual, which is obvious, editing for concepts. There's copy editing, where you're editing the sentence structure and paragraph structure. And then there's proofreading, where you're looking for typos and misspellings and bad punctuation. Now, you can't do all 3 at once. It's like juggling 3 very different objects, like this guy's doing. So what you do is, when you're going to go back and edit your book, you think, okay, I'm going to edit just for concept now, or then I'm just going to edit for copy, or I'm just going to edit as a proofreading exercise. It's also, finally, murder your children. This is difficult for authors to do. You've written your book, it's perfect. There's absolutely nothing that needs to be changed with it. Well, that's when you need to go away from the book for about a month or 2 and come back and look for a metaphor or simile that just doesn't work, technical jargon, explanation is too complicated, or is too much detail. So be ruthless, return with a ruthless editorial scalpel, but also listen to a good editor. For the climate book, I had a fact checker who was absolutely terrific and saved me from tons of errors. And then I had an incredible editor who knew about climate science and who really held my feet to the fire. So listen to a good editor. So with that, I think that's my presentation. I will attempt to stop sharing my screen there. Okay. So questions?
Thank you, Dennis. So I have a question. With the pre-research before you kind of queried for an agent, how
Let me
much
turn up my sound a little bit. Say that again.
how much pre-research did you do before you sent your book pitch to an agent?
For the climate, excuse me, let me switch over just to show you what I'm talking about. For this book, I had actually written almost all the book. And it was just, I knew the book was important. I wanted to write the book. I wanted to do it on my own terms. So I wrote almost the entire manuscript, maybe the entire manuscript, before I went to Oxford for it. With this book, obviously, since we published it under our own imprint, I didn't deal with an agent. I didn't have to deal with any of that, and so I wrote the book. But then, importantly, I gave it to a fact checker and an editor who really did a great job of editing for me.
And a question from our chat that's directly linked to this is, how did you find your fact checker?
Fortunately, there happened to be an editorial company that had all full service, and so I went to them and I said, "Look, here's the book. What do I need to do?" And Megan Seaver was the editor, and Dr. Tripathi Lang was the fact checker, and so she put me onto a fact checker, and said, "Here's a fact checker who has a degree in earth science, who will be perfect, and she's meticulous and she's tireless, and she'd be perfect for you." So just about any place you can, excuse me, any editorial service you can go to will have a fact checker. And if you get an agent can recommend a fact checker for you. And certainly if you get a publisher, you can just ask a publisher for a fact checker. But I recommend it because not only does it relieves you of the stress and the worry of having bad facts, but it also gives the book an authority that it might not otherwise have. Now, I should say what happens with academic publishers, and this is not quite fact checking, but what happens with academic publishers is once they are considering your book, they will send it to 3 experts in the field, and they'll ask those experts to review it and recommend whether it should be published. Now, those experts are not going to fact check, but they're going to at least tell the publisher that this is an authoritative work. But I recommend, it's not cheap, but I recommend a fact checker.
Thanks. Meredith, do you want to ask your question out loud, or you want me to just say it?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. But I would chip in there. So one thing I often hear, first of all, Dennis, thanks a million. It's always great to learn from you. One thing I think a lot of us struggle with is, we might have an important, you mentioned, for instance, explaining research was important, and you knew that. How do you, first of all, where do you look for your ideas? And second of all, how do you know you've got an angle on a book that's going to be interesting and not just a topic? For instance, I remember a young writer once saying to me, I want to write a story about water. And I said, okay. What?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it has to it has to resonate with you. It has to excite you, first of all, and you have to be convinced that it's something that you can spend years doing. But if it excites you, that is, if you know enough about the field, you need to go and research the field after you've had this germ of an idea. You go and research the whole field and see whether this germ of an idea is unique, and whether you have something interesting to say. And so once you do that sort of global research and you're confident, then you can go with it. Now, I should also say, when you're writing a proposal, this is important. When you're writing a proposal, all proposal guides say you have to list other books in the field. And so that's a great exercise for you to decide whether you really want to have an idea that's worthwhile. Because when you go look at those other books in the field and you see that a lot of them are overlapping or even duplicating what you want to do, then that's a sign you don't have a book that's interesting to an author, to a publisher or an agent. So just the very exercise of writing a proposal is going to crystallize your idea, and it's also going to let you know whether that's really a unique take on what you want to write.
And so, how's writing a book proposal different than writing, say, a pitch for like a 600 or 1,000-word piece?
A book proposal, I was going to say, I forgot to say this. Go to Google and Google writing a book proposal, and you'll find a whole bunch of guides on it. And go to the website of the publisher you want to target and look at their guidelines for writing a book proposal. But the book proposal has a whole set of requirements that you need to fulfill in order to write a legitimate proposal. And so that structure is going to tell you exactly what they want and exactly what you have to do. So you have to, for example, you have to have an elevator pitch, maybe 1 sentence or 2 sentences that crystallizes your book idea. You have to have a synopsis. You have to have a chapter outline. You have to have competing books. You have to have a biography that tells whoever's reading it why you why you can write the book, why you're logical person to write the book. So that book proposal has a whole structure, as opposed to, say, a pitch for an article. A pitch for an article can only be only a page maybe, because you have busy editors. And I just pitched an article, by the way, to some magazines, and I found that a lot of magazines just have a fill in the blank thing where you're supposed to just put a 300-word idea for your article, and that's about it. A book proposal, you have to go chapter and verse through their required structure, and that is going to help you understand whether you have a book or not.
A question from the chat is, so do you have like an average % time that you've committed to the book? We'll go with the climate pandemic versus kind of your main job.
Well, I'm sort of retired, so I can put in as much time as I want. I would just do whatever time you can. It takes me 2 or 3 hours in the morning to sort of get into the flow of writing. And then I run out of neurotransmitter and I have to quit and go do something else, usually annoy my wife. So if you can devote a couple 3 hours a day to it. Now, I know people have jobs, they're busy, they have families, and they want to have a social life. So pull whatever time you can out of that schedule. And sometimes people feel more comfortable writing early in the morning, sometimes late at night, sometimes when the kids are asleep. So just do whatever you can. Now, one of the phenomena that I found that just surprised the heck out of me was when I was writing explaining research, and when I was writing the climate pandemic and my novels, I never felt that I wrote enough to write a book. I'd be writing, and I'd say, oh, this is not going to, I'm not going to have enough to write this is not going to work as a book. And I'd keep writing a little bit a day, a little bit a day. And all of a sudden I had a book. And I was kind of surprised when it got to be book sized, because I didn't remember writing that much. And so I'm writing a novel now, and I'm just sort of writing a scene a day or a scene every couple of 3 days. And I looked up the other day and I have 30,000 words, and I don't know how I got there, but you're going to find that it never feels enough, but all of a sudden it's enough. So it's a kind of a comforting thing to know that you don't have to take it all at once. You can write bits at a time and end up with a book.
So what has been the most satisfying and frustrating thing about writing a book?
The most satisfying is having said what you needed to say in a way that you wanted to say it. And that was incredibly satisfying, because in terms of climate pandemic, there were a whole bunch of ideas that I thought needed to get out there, and I got them out there the way that I wanted. I had control of the book. The most frustrating was dealing with a publisher, in the sense that publishers have a whole bunch of things that they want to do. They have criteria, and sometimes they're difficult for an author to understand. For example, Oxford University Press had to have three scientists, climate scientists, look at my book. Well, the editor, I gave them a year to finish that process, and the editor, the science editor at Oxford, couldn't find enough climate scientists who were willing to write to go through the full book that I'd written, which is 120,000 words. And so it just didn't work. And then I realized that it was going to take at least another year or so for that process. It was going to take a year or 6 months to a year to do the contract and deal with all that. It was going to take another year to lay the book out and go through the layout and design process, and then another year before it got onto their publishing list. So that's one of the reasons that we decided to publish ourselves, because we could do it and do it with quality and with fact checking, with editing in 6 months, because we didn't have to go through the editorial machinery. So just the lag time, even if you get a successful commercial publisher or successful agent, you're going to find that the lag time, it can be years between the time you finish a book and the time that it finally hits the market.
And so, what are some factors that interested writers and authors should think about with the publishing process, and more specifically considering costs of that?
The cost?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going with an agent and a commercial publisher, it should cost you nothing. I'm sorry, back up. That's not quite true. The business of editing and publishing should cost you nothing, but you will be required, for example, to pay for the index. And so the publisher will give you, for nonfiction books, the publisher will give you an advance, but they expect that advance to pay for the index, the book index. So if you're publishing yourself, you have to foot the bill for layout, design, and so forth. And there's that cost. Did that answer the question?
I think so. What is a book index?
The book index, that's the index at the back that you go to when you want to find things in the book. So, you go look up X in the index, and it says it's on page 34. And then you go to page 34, and there it is. And so it's different. The table of contents is at the front, the index is at the back. And writing, doing an index for a nonfiction book is a high art. You can try doing it yourself and do a fair job. There's Word, I think Microsoft Word will automatically index a manuscript. But then there's a high art in terms of going through the book and seeing whether there are more complicated topics that a reader will be interested in that you need to index. And so the company that I worked with on the climate pandemic, for example, they had, I think, three levels of index. One was where they just went through and did an automatic index. Another is where they just sort of basically read through the book and made sure that they had all the proper nouns and so proper titles and so forth indexed. And the third was where they actually went through, the indexer went through and read the book and thought about what the topics were and what the concepts were that needed to be put into the index. So an index is a very complicated process. And so beware of trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I had never thought about the index being something that complicated, but I guess it does make sense.
Yeah, because people need to find what they want in the book. And the table of contents will give them sort of a general guide. But if you want to find X, Professor X, that's not going to be in the table of contents. You want to go to the index and see that Professor X was cited on pages 35, 412, or whatever. So an index is a very important aspect of the book.
Are there any other book aspects that people may not have thought about, such as the index?
Illustrations.
Mhm.
You'll want to make sure that you know what you want to illustrate, and you want to go get the rights to those illustrations. You also want to listen to your editor. Originally, Climate Pandemic was not going to have any illustrations, but then a couple of the reviewers said, well, you need to have these 2 or 3 graphs. And fortunately, they were produced by the government, so they didn't cost me anything to post. So when you're writing your book, I know I'm a writer, I think text, but when you're writing a book, think about what the reader wants to see. So illustrations are very important. There's a book I'm writing now where I know that it's going to be really heavily illustrated. It's going to be dozens of images and illustrations, and so it's going to be an entirely different process than I did with my previous books, in that I'm going to have to really think visually. I'm going to have to think where the illustrations go and what they mean.
And how has the process, I guess with the writing process, how has that been different between your fiction and nonfiction works?
Well, with nonfiction, it has to be true. With fiction, I can just pull it right out of my head and make it true. You have to with fiction, all you have to do is make them believe that it's true. It's called suspension of disbelief. And so there are techniques that fiction writers use that if you know those techniques and you see them being used, this author is achieving suspension of disbelief by making having concrete sensory information and so forth. So I'm the novel I'm writing now, it's absolutely ridiculous, but I think I can make people believe it by using the techniques. But nonfiction, you can't rely on suspension of disbelief. It has to be true.
And so how have the final published products of all of your books differed from what you've pitched or the first draft of those books?
For both books, for both the Explaining Research and the Climate Pandemic, the final product, the layout was more accessible than I thought it would be. And the reason is an interior layout designer, they are gods as far as I'm concerned, because they can take this big undifferentiated mass of text that you've given them, and they can organize it and use typography and use space and so forth to make it very readable. One thing that I did with the climate book that kind of surprised me about how effective it was I used a lot of bolded subheads to chunk the text. And when the final book came out, I was really pleased to see that the way the designer did that interior to use those subheads and white space to make it easier for the reader to get through this complicated book. It was very satisfying. So that was particularly gratifying that worked. And I have to say that Oxford, for the second edition of Explaining Research, also did a great job of laying this very long, complicated book out and then making it accessible. But again, I thought about what had to draw the eye and make it easier for the eye to read a lot of text. And so I used a lot of subheads. I used, for Explaining Research, used a lot of bullet points. Well, both books actually, bullet points, use italics to give the reader a sense that they could read through this complicated text easily.
Let's see. So from the chat, so specifically for your nonfiction books, did you interview researchers or others in the area? Or what other kind of sources helped with the writing process the most?
Originally, I was going to go interview. Am I blurry? My wow.
Just
I'm
a little
blurring. Oh my God, I'm blurring. For my nonfiction, for the climate book, originally I was going to go interview a lot of climate scientists, but I realized that to be credible, rather than have their opinions and so forth, I needed to go to the original sources. And so when I got a piece of research, I would only cite their scientific papers because they had been peer reviewed. Now I did quote them, but I found quotes in the Washington Post and New York Times and so forth that I knew were credible and that I knew expressed their views effectively. But I didn't feel like going to talk to the scientists would be as productive or as valid than if I used went to the primary sources, and that's what they published and what they were willing to say in their scientific papers, and was peer reviewed by their colleagues. So that sort of grounded what I had to do. Now it's different if you're writing a nonfiction book where you're going to report on things. If you're going to report on a field trip, obviously you want to interview the scientist, and obviously you want to get first person feel for what they're doing. So there's difference in what I did, which was to have a really highly documented explanation of the research. But between that and going to the field and going into research laboratories and interviewing the scientists and getting a sense of who they were and what they were doing. So there's a different approach to different kinds of nonfiction books.
Before I ask more questions, does anyone else want to ask out loud? Because I will continue. No? Yes, no? Okay, you go ahead, Dennis.
I see Dennis's hand up.
Yeah, I'm coming on board. Hi, Dennis.
Hi.
I actually met you many years ago, but both of us had more hair then.
Yeah, mine's gone away. Are you seeing my green screen now?
Yeah.
All right, let me go back.
It looks interesting, like green.
Yeah, I have a new computer,
Yeah.
and it forgets. This is a much more sophisticated computer, but it keeps forgetting to focus, and it forgets that I have a green screen, and I don't understand it. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah. Hey, I'm just thinking back on careers and stuff like that, and thinking back for when did you first get interested in becoming a science communicator?
I'd gotten a chemistry degree from the University of Texas, but I wasn't good at chemistry. I didn't get molecules. I didn't understand molecules. So I figured I'm not going to have a very good career as a chemist. And I happened to take a course in writing my senior year, and I thought, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. Well, I was looking through Science Magazine, and they had an ad for a science writing program at the University of Wisconsin. I said, oh, I could write about it. I know I like writing better. So it was my graduate work at Wisconsin where I got a degree in biochemistry and science writing. So it was, but I actually began writing much earlier, when I was 10 or 11 years old.
Sure. Yeah. If I could ask one other question then too, was there anybody who really inspired you or was somebody that you said, well, this is what I really want to be doing, or this person really helped me become a better, or
Well, I mean, in terms of
Marshall.
authors, Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, in particular, all those folks. I got to meet Ray Bradbury one time, and it was just, it was really exciting. And so I really like them. In terms of direct influence, the science writing program at Wisconsin was just seminal, because I showed up as a graduate student. They showed me a little cubby hole and showed me a typewriter. I hadn't used a typewriter before. And they said, okay, now you start writing, and we're going to critique you. And so we went through this process of writing and being critiqued by our colleagues that really helped me understand what I needed to do to be a writer. So one of the suggestions that I give to people who want to become writers is certainly take courses in writing, but get opportunities to be edited, because when you're edited, it just is so directly applicable to what you've just written that you absorb those lessons in a much more effective way than if you've just taken a course where somebody has told you the concepts and you've written an essay and it's gotten graded A, B, or C. So that one-on-one editing was very effective in terms of my evolution.
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent advice. Yeah. Thank you.
Dennis, are there any places where anyone could find book proposal guides or posted book proposals to maybe take apart for their own use, to like figure out how they can use those that structure for their own ideas?
First, I'd go, if you have an academic publisher in particular that you're interested in reaching, go to that publisher's website, and they'll have guidelines for writing a proposal. Otherwise, you just Google writing a book proposal, and you'll find lots of articles on writing a book proposal. Similarly, go to Amazon and put book proposal in the search term, and they're all pretty good. I don't have any that particularly stand out, but if you go and read several of them, you'll get a really good sense of what it means to write a book proposal, an effective book proposal.
And so you said that okay, the climate pandemic, you said you published under your own imprint.
Right.
What does that mean?
We have our own publishing house. We only do my books, actually, so it's not a publishing house in a sense. But it means that I outsourced the cover design, the interior, the index, and I had complete control. My wife and I had complete control over all of those aspects of it. You don't if you're going to publish with a publisher. The publisher, that's why you need an agent. An agent is going to act on your behalf and make sure that you have all the rights that you need to do the book to your satisfaction. But when you go to a publisher, you don't necessarily have control over the title of your book, over the cover, over the interior layout, and other aspects of it. So you have to make sure that you understand what your rights are. But with publishing under your own imprint, you have, the good news is you have total control. The bad news is you have total control. And that is, you can really mess up a book if you're not careful, if you don't really do what you need to do to make it a quality book. Now, fortunately, I had a design company called 1106 Design that has done all of my books that I published under our imprint, and they're high quality. They listened. They really did what I wanted to do. And for example, the cover was a stock photo that I found, and I thought really told the story of the book, what I wanted to say with the book. But then their designer took that stock image and did that beautiful design for the cover. And that's, it's incredibly important. With Explaining Research, the first edition, they had, this was decades ago, the first edition, they had their designer do the cover, and they came to me with 2 designs, both of which I thought were horrible. But I didn't have any choice. So I chose the one that was less horrible. For the second edition, they were, I don't know why, but they were much more open to the cover. And I found the image. Let me bring that up so you know what I'm talking about. I found the image that's on the cover of these really cool neurons, and I gave that to them, and they used that for the cover. So the difference is control.
Hi, hello, Dennis. I have a few questions. So one question is, do you have audiobook versions of your books? If so, how do you do that? And then my next question is, if I'm interested in possibly writing a nonfiction book, but also I want it to be very like creative and have a lot of vivid illustrations, how would I go about that?
As far as audiobooks, that's a completely different decision that you negotiate with a publisher, and the publisher will, your agent will negotiate the rights for the audiobook, and it's up to the publisher to do the audiobook. And so if you're doing a commercial, that's what you want to do. As far as doing the book with illustrations, what you want to do, if it's going to be a book where you need an illustrator, you can go to a lot of websites that have collections of illustrators, and you can find one that's doing what you want to do. And then you'd have to pay the illustrator to do your illustrations. Or you can go to stock photo houses. There are a whole bunch of stock photo houses that have gorgeous images that you can you can buy for not much money to use in your book. I guess you could just Google stock photo, and you'll come up with all sorts of lists of stock photo houses. So what you want to do is first you write your book, and then you think about what do the readers want to see? What do they need to see? So you can go to stock photo houses, you can go to the government. If I'm writing a book now about space, and NASA is going to be a prime supplier of my images, and they're going to be free. So you can go to the government, you can go to an illustrator to illustrate your book. So you just have to do a lot of homework to write your book, and then think about what visuals do people need to see. So it's sort of understanding always put yourself in the place of your reader. What's the reader going to want to see in your book?
Thank you.
So Dennis, with books taking so long to kind of finish and like market, how do you stay up to date with changing research?
That's tough. It would have been particularly tough with the climate book, because there's always new studies and always new insights. And so that's why we felt we needed to publish it to get it out quickly. So it's relevant, it's current. So what I'm doing with the climate book is I have a website. One of the things you can do with a nonfiction book is have a website. In this case, it's climatepandemic.com. And on the website, you can have updates. You can say, okay, since the book, I'm planning to do this, it's going to be a big deal, a big task. What I'm planning to do is find more recent studies and have a page on the website that says, all right, since the book was published, it's still, all the concepts of the book are still valid, but here are updated studies in these various areas that may help you. And I think that may be useful in particular to academics who want to use the book in their courses, because they'll know that even though the book is a year or 2 or 3 years old, that they can go to the website and they can see new studies that bolster what the book said. So websites help you keep up to date. That's one way to do it.
How do you go about getting your book used in courses? Do academics or researchers just like ask if they can use it, or are there also book guidelines you have to follow?
There are a lot of marketing. If you have a publisher like Oxford, that's going to happen automatically. Oxford is going to pitch the book to all of their academic outlets. And so if your book is an academic type book, and I guess it's same with commercial publishers, if your book has an academic, possible academic uses, they will take care of that. For the climate pandemic, we are trying to get into library journal. There are a whole bunch of things we're trying to do to make sure at least that faculty know that the book is available for their courses. So there's a whole bunch of things you need to do to make it available to academics.
Thank you. Does anyone else? We have a couple of minutes left. I want to make sure people get their questions asked.
Dennis, what is something nobody ever asks you, but you think people should know
Oh
about
my,
writing
oh, Marianne, oh my goodness.
something like you just never get a chance to say.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. What have I not been asked? What do I want to have been asked? Oh my gosh. I can't
Can't believe I stumped the master. Sorry
You
about that.
stumped me. Well, this is not, people ask me this all the time, but it hasn't been asked here. The whole thing about where do you get your ideas for fiction books in particular? And I think for fiction books, and it's also true for nonfiction books, almost always in my experience, the idea for a book has just come in the form of one moment or one sentence that sort of made me think about, God, I need to see if this is a book. And for the climate book, I took a hike. I would take hikes around the area of north of San Diego. And at one hike I found a really great hike that took me up to an overlook, a beautiful ridge overlooking this freeway. And the freeway at that point was the major north-south freeway between San Diego and Temecula, and it was absolutely packed with cars. It was a huge traffic jam, and all of these people were one to a car, and they didn't care what the environmental impact was. They just wanted to be in their car, and they didn't care if they were in a traffic jam. And I thought, they don't care about the climate. I need to go explore what people know about, what the scientists are saying about climate, and what people understand about climate, and why all these people are perfectly willing to spend a lot of money on gas and a lot of money on wearing their car out and a lot of time to do what they do to get in these traffic jams. So that was sort of the germ of the idea for the climate book. Yeah. And for the fiction books, it's always one sentence that popped into my head that sort of begins to either accrete or metastasize, depending on how you look at it. There's one of my favorite stories of all time about that is one day, J.R.R. Tolkien was grading English essays. He was an English professor, and he was grading these essays, and he came to an essay that had a blank piece of a blank part of the page, and on the page he wrote, in the hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. He had no idea what a hobbit was. He didn't know. It just came into his head, and he thought, what's a hobbit, and what would it do? How would it live? What kind of adventures could it have? And that one sentence started the whole trilogy, the J.R. more than a trilogy, the whole range of his books. And so I've had the same experience over and over and over, where one sentence started me on writing a 80,000 word novel.
I love that insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And I think that is like a really good spot to stop.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, it's very good like sentiment to end on.
Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and you can email me with questions at any time.
And Dennis is also, if you guys have not participated in our writers program before, Dennis is also one of our editors for our writers program, and I haven't heard any complaints. So I'm assuming he's a very kind editor.
I'm not, well, the thing is, I'm not kind, I'm very brutal, but these writers, these young writers that we've gotten have just been so good that this last one I said, I'm really brutal, but I can't do anything to your text because it's so good. And I just made 6, 8, 10 suggestions. So I told the writer, I said, I'm sorry, but you're going to become a writer. I feel badly for
It's
you.
inevitable.
I really feel badly for you.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and thank you everyone for attending this month's Mentor Chat. The rest of our 2023 Mentor Chat series is all booked up, and you've already received our spring schedule, but keep an eye out for the rest of the year. And thank you to everyone who sent in suggestions. If you have any more guests that you would like to chat with, feel free to send them my way so we can keep the series going for as long as we exist. Our next 2 Mentor Chats will be all about connecting with audiences. So we'll have public relations expert Justin Joseph in May to give tips on distilling our research. And in June, we'll have Laura Lindenfield from the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science to chat about how we can use improv to unlock audience connection. And again, thank you all. I'll have these recordings posted